Hello again, FA Nation. Justin Fensterman here, and it's time for another episode of Fantasy Football ADP TV here on FantasyAlarm.com. Talking fantasy football, average draft position, spotlighting players who I like, considering where they're going in fantasy football drafts, and others that I don't like as much. Let's talk about the 2 running backs and 2 wide receivers featured in today's episode. Let's get after it. First, a wide receiver who I love going late second, early third round of 12-team fantasy football drafts, Higgins from the Bengals. Thought this going into last season, and nothing's changed going into this one. I want a piece of this receiving core, and Higgins' end of second round, early third round value provides us awesome fantasy football value. He had over 100 targets last season and received at least 6 in most games in 2022. He finished the season as a top 20 fantasy producer at the position, even with Jamar Chase around. Only 11 wide receivers caught more touchdown passes than Higgins last year. It's been proven that both of these receivers can eat in the Bengals offense, and Higgins logged over 1,000 yards receiving for the second straight season in 2022, and that shouldn't change heading into 2023. Chase being there absolutely shouldn't scare you off of Higgins, since he averaged 265 passing yards per game last year, ranking them 5th in the league. A running back who I like going in the 7th round of fantasy football drafts, Dameon Pierce. Coming into this season, Houston beefed up their offensive line a bit, and Pierce should have a bit more protection. He logged over 900 yards on the ground and ran for 4.3 yards per carry last year. Despite Devin Singletary being around in Houston, Pierce should still get plenty of volume, at least on the ground, and we should see his touchdown numbers rise. Singletary will eat into potential targets in the passing attack, but there's room for both to get targeted with a rookie quarterback and an unproven receiving core for the Texans. Remember, Pierce missed the final few games of the season last year. He's sturdy and hard to take down, and the 7th round price point makes it worth taking the risk. I'd gladly have him as my 3rd running back on my fantasy teams heading into the year. He was able to have success running behind one of the weaker offensive lines in the league last season. Running back that I'm not as high on, Travis Etienne going in the 4th round. It's no secret that Doug Peterson likes to use multiple running backs in his system, and we saw multiple running backs get featured last year. First, it was James Robinson, who was prioritized in this offense, leaving us in a big ball of confusion before he got dealt. Despite rushing for over 1,100 yards and averaging over 5 yards per carry in 2022, it became hard to tell and predict what Etienne's utilization would be on a game-by-game basis. Etienne did have fumbling issues along the way. He didn't get targeted in the passing attack a lot, exceeding 3 targets in just 3 games in 2022. He also logged just 5 rushing scores, and the Jaguars drafted Tank Bigsby, who could serve as competition for Etienne once the Jaguars get close to the goal line. Knowing Peterson, he'll find a way to use both running backs. A receiver that I'm not so keen on considering where he's going in fantasy football drafts, Marquise Brown. 5th round, 6th round, there's a lot of unknowns surrounding the Cardinals offense and how they're going to perform. We don't even know when we'll see Kyler Murray play, as his timetable to return is a bit loose. DeAndre Hopkins being gone certainly raises Brown's ceiling, but let's not forget, he did receive 8+ targets in 4 of his final 6 games. But he didn't hit the end zone in any of those contests and exceeded 60 yards receiving just once during that span. It's a new coaching system, and even with the receiving core pretty bare in Arizona, it's not enough for me to invest a 5th round fantasy football draft pick in this poor offense. The team will be absolutely forced to throw a lot, but it's hard to tell what kind of quality we're going to get, and Arizona comes into the season with a weaker offensive line, and Colt McCoy could find himself with not a lot of time to hit Brown deep. Other receivers being drafted around him are more appealing in fantasy football leagues. And that is another episode of Fantasy Football ADP TV, FA Nation. Get the Fantasy Alarm Living Draft Guide right now on FantasyAlarm.com. All articles are living, which means something happens. An injury occurs even before the season starts. Everything gets updated. Everything changes. Much better than a print magazine. That's what happens when you invest in your Fantasy Alarm family.